Chapter 1. Queen Aliska of Volkov married for alliance on a Tuesday and was poisoned by her own court on a Thursday. The histories disagreed on which Thursday. Callista adjusted her cotton conservation gloves. The parchment was 4 centuries old and would crumble at the touch of bare skin, made a note in the margin about confirming the source and cross-referencing the Vassic Chronicle, and turned the page. Something in her chest settled at the familiar crackle of old vellum. The low, warm hum that lived behind her ribs, the one she'd had for as long as she could remember, quieted to a purr. Safe. Ours. Handled correctly. Good. She'd never named it. It wasn't the kind of thing you named. It was just there. A presence that had opinions about how things were stored, shelved, and protected. A part of her that bristled when a courier removed a document without logging it, that made her jaw tight when she caught a scribe rebinding a manuscript with the wrong thread. She'd once physically stepped in front of a visiting scholar who tried to take a first edition chronicle off the shelf without gloves, and her heart had been pounding for 10 minutes afterward, which seemed disproportionate, but the chronicle was from the Second Northern War, and he had greasy fingers. Other wolves talked about their inner selves like second voices, loud, opinionated, constantly narrating. Callista's didn't narrate. It guarded. It sat on top of her things like a dragon on a hoard, and most of the time, since her things were books and parchment and ink, this simply made her an exceptionally territorial archivist. 14 queens had sat on the Volkov throne in the last 3 centuries. 9 had died violently. 3 had disappeared under circumstances the archives described as unexplained, which was historians' code for, we know exactly what happened and it was awful. The remaining 2 had lived to old age, which in the Volkov court qualified as a miracle. She shouldn't find this comforting. She found it comforting. There was something deeply reassuring about other people's catastrophes when they were safely dead and bound in leather. Callista's own catastrophes, her grandfather stripped of his title, her family's lands seized, a childhood spent learning that wanting things was the fastest route to losing them, were still too close. Still raw-edged, even after a decade of burying them under parchment and ink. The heavy oak door at the far end of the hall groaned open. Light cut through the gloom, bringing the scent of winter pine and cold steel. Callista didn't look up, but the thing behind her ribs did. It lifted its head, alert, assessing, the way it did when someone entered her archive without authorization. Her wolf assessed. Unknown, approaching, large. Only one person in the entire citadel entered the archives without a formal request, and he wasn't a man who appreciated being noticed before he was ready. Footsteps. Slow. The particular unhurried stride of someone who had never once in his life worried about being late, because the world rearranged itself around his schedule. A shadow fell over Queen Aliska's death certificate. You work late, archivist. King Caspian's voice was the kind of low that you felt in your sternum before your ears processed it. It was the vocal equivalent of a large animal deciding whether to let you leave the clearing. Callista lifted her head. She blinked against the lantern he carried, which cast his face in gold and shadow, and was almost certainly an accident of lighting, and not, as her hindbrain unhelpfully suggested, evidence that the universe had a bias toward dramatic cheekbones. He was younger than the histories would eventually make him. Jaw like a cliff face. Eyes the color of the sea before a storm, the kind that saw too much, catalogued too fast, and missed nothing worth knowing. The presence behind her ribs performed a rapid inventory. Not a threat to the collection, not touching anything. Acceptable distance from the Vassic Chronicles. Stance, dominant but not aggressive. Assessment, tolerable. Then, quieter, almost reluctant, her wolf added, smells good. Callista ignored this. She ignored it every time he came to the archives, which was more often than a king should visit a room full of dead people's paperwork. History is never finished, Your Majesty, she said. It only gathers more dust. Something that wasn't quite a smile moved across his mouth. My council believes history is a weapon. They're not wrong. A well-placed fact can undo a treaty. A forgotten law can legitimize a throne. Or force a king's hand. His gaze swept the towering shelves. They've found a treaty, an old one, signed in blood by my great-grandfather. It promises the hand of the Volkov king to the firstborn daughter of the House of Dragas, in exchange for their allegiance in the Southern War. Callista's fingers stilled on the parchment. The House of Dragas. Hard people from harder territory. Their current alpha, Dragan, considered diplomacy a form of weakness, and his daughter Sevda was rumored to be his perfect echo. Beautiful, brutal, and about as warm as a glacier with a grudge. The thing in her chest shifted. Not alarm exactly, more like a sentry adjusting its grip. Someone is trying to take something from the archive. Not a book, bigger. Pay attention. She didn't know why her wolf categorized this as a threat to her domain. The king wasn't hers. The throne wasn't hers. None of this was hers. Her wolf disagreed, in its silent, absolute way, and offered no further explanation. The treaty was contingent on the Dragas clan losing their southern pass, she said. The knowledge surfaced without effort. She remembered everything she read. It was inconvenient approximately 80% of the time. They didn't lose it. The contingency was never met. The treaty is void. My counsel, Elder Ruja, specifically, interprets differently. She reads the allegiance as the core agreement, the contingency as a footnote. He paused. She also reads a king who is unwed and unbonded as a weakness in the bloodline. They're using history to write your future, Callista said quietly. And I need an archivist to write me a different one. The air between them changed. This wasn't a scholarly visit. Something in the way he held himself, the contained energy, the particular stillness that she'd learned to read in the way she read marginalia, looking for what was almost said, told her that whatever came next would be the kind of thing that didn't stay inside the archives. Your Majesty? The treaty has one loophole, a single clause even Ruja cannot argue. The pact is nullified if the Volkov heir is already bonded. He straightened to his full height, which had the effect of making the cavernous ceiling seem lower. Mated. Her heart thudded. But you're not. No, he said, I am not. The silence between those words and the next was long enough for Callista to mentally compose her own death certificate. Callista of House Moraine, cause of death? Agreeing to something stupid in a library. Her wolf, meanwhile, had gone very still. The way it went still when someone reached for a document it hadn't decided to release yet. I need a queen, he said. A temporary one. Someone who can stand beside me and make the court believe that I am completely, irrevocably devoted. Someone they'll look at and see not a political move, but a woman my wolf chose. You want me to pretend? Yes. The shelves seemed to lean in. Somewhere in the deep stacks, a book fell. Callista decided this was the universe offering commentary. Why me? Because you're perfect, he said, and the way he said it made it sound like a diagnosis. No powerful family to leverage the arrangement, intelligent enough to navigate the court. You know the history, the protocols, and his eyes swept over her plain wool dress and ink-stained fingers. You're unassuming. No one would believe I chose you for political advantage. They'll have no choice but to believe it's real. Unassuming. The word landed with the gentle thud of a compliment falling just short of its target. She was being selected for her strategic invisibility. Wonderful. Her wolf bristled. Not at the insult, at the assessment. He looked at us and saw nothing worth guarding. He is wrong. This is noted. He was asking her to lie to a court of wolves. Wolves who could smell fear, deception, and, the part that made this particular plan feel especially doomed, desire, or the conspicuous lack of it. What you're asking is treasonous, she said. To feign a royal bond? What they are doing is treasonous, forcing their king's hand, cornering the crown. The growl came back into his voice. something not entirely civilized. This is a proposition, archivist. Your family's lands, the ones stripped from your grandfather, will be restored. Your name honored. A life beyond these pages. The offer hit her harder than she expected. The lands, the name, the thing she'd spent 10 years pretending she didn't grieve. She thought of her grandfather's face the day they'd come for the deed. Dignified, silent, already smaller than he'd been that morning. She'd been 12. She'd promised herself she would get it back. She'd stopped promising herself things after that. Her wolf didn't stop. Her wolf had never stopped. It had simply redirected, guarding parchment instead of land, protecting ink instead of name. A small territory, but hers. Now someone was offering to give the real thing back. And when it's over, we stage a quiet separation. You retire to your estates, wealthy and respected. I deal with my council. A gilded cage for a dusty one. She looked down at the death certificate of Queen Aliska, who had probably been offered something similar, and thought, but the new cage has sunlight, and your current cage smells like mildew. The performance would have to be convincing, she said, and couldn't believe the words were leaving her mouth. Flawless, he corrected. Every glance, every touch. The word touch hung between them like a lit fuse. She had the sudden, visceral awareness that she had not been touched by another person in a meaningful way in approximately 3 years, and that this was probably going to be a problem. Her wolf had an opinion about this. 3 years is too long. This is a security failure. Unguarded perimeter. Unacceptable. She told her wolf to be quiet. Her wolf was never quiet. It simply chose which silences to fill. He extended his hand. Warriors' hands, she noticed. Calloused, long-fingered. Not the hands of a politician. Do we have an accord? She pulled off the cotton gloves. She'd forgotten she was still wearing them, and placed her fingers in his palm. His skin was warm, startlingly so against her cold archivist's hands. Something in her chest did a small, involuntary thing. She filed it under physiological response to stress and proximity. See also, panic. Her wolf filed it differently. Her wolf filed it under, his hand is large enough to cover ours completely. Noted. Relevant to what? Unclear. Filing continues. He closed his hand around hers. Firm, decisive. In the quiet of the archives, surrounded by the histories of dead queens and the lies of living kings, Callista felt the first tremor of a story she was about to write herself. She gave it even odds that she'd survive the first chapter. Theron Ashvane looked at the pair of them standing in the king's private study, then at the ceiling, then at the pair of them again, and said, "No." Theron, no, absolutely not. This is, and I want you to hear me clearly, the worst idea you have ever had. And I was present for the river campaign. He turned to Callista with the expression of a man who had just been asked to hold a lit torch in a room full of oil. No offense meant. None taken, Callista said. I also think it's a terrible idea. Wonderful, we're in agreement. Caspian, tell her it was a momentary lapse and let's never speak of it again. Sit down, Theron. Theron did not sit down. He paced, which he did with a kind of contained, efficient energy that made the room feel smaller. He was lean where Caspian was broad, with pale gray eyes that held a perpetual watchfulness and the particular grace of someone who had spent years anticipating violence so he could stand between it and the people he loved. He was also the last son of House Ashvane, a military line stripped of everything for backing the wrong side. He'd been 14 when Caspian's father gave him a choice. Swear fealty or exile. He'd sworn. He'd stayed. Not because he was weak, but because even at 14, he'd been able to tell the difference between a bad king and a boy who might become a good one. He carried the title of Beta, but he moved like an alpha, held a room like one. Caspian was the only person he genuinely deferred to, and it wasn't because of rank. It was because Theron had decided, a long time ago, that Caspian was worth following. "She can't even look at you without blinking like she's staring at direct sunlight," Theron said, gesturing at Callista. "That's because he brought a lantern into a dark room and my eyes hadn't adjusted," Callista said. "It's going to be a problem," Theron said. "My eyes?" Callista asked. "Your entire bearing. You make yourself small. You stand like you're apologizing for taking up space." He walked around her, his gaze clinical. "A bonded mate doesn't shrink. She takes up room because she knows the room is hers. You need to believe it." Callista's wolf perked up at this. "The room is ours? Which room? This room?" "We accept. We will need to rearrange the furniture." "I'll work on it." "You'll work on it with me, every day, starting now." He turned to Caspian. "How long do we have?" "Ruja convenes the council in 6 days to formally propose the Dragas alliance." 6 days to turn an archivist into a queen. Perfect. Wonderful. I love this plan. He did not love this plan. He was already committed to it. He pulled 2 chairs to face each other and sat in one. "Sit. We're going to start with the basics. When he enters a room, your eyes find him. Not because you're told to, because you can't help it." "Like a reflex," Callista said. "Like a bond. There's a difference. A reflex is involuntary. A bond is, you chose this person, and every time you see them, your body remembers why." He paused. "That's the part you need to sell." "The part where my body remembers why I chose the king?" she repeated flatly. "The king I met 4 hours ago? In a library?" "Now you see my concern." There was a moment of silence. Then Caspian, who had been standing by the window with his arms folded and his expression carved from something harder than patience, said, "Tell her about the scent." Theron closed his eyes. "Right, the scent problem." "What scent problem?" "Bonded pairs carry each other's scent. Not as a perfume, it's deeper than that. It lives in the skin, the hair, the clothes. A wolf who is truly bonded smells like 2 people who have been sleeping in the same space, wearing each other's things, breathing the same air." He opened his eyes. "You smell like paper and lavender. He smells like pine and cold metal. Together, you smell like 2 strangers who got lost in the same corridor." "So what do we do?" "You wear his cloak, starting now. You use soap from his chambers. You sleep with his spare furs on your bed." Theron delivered this with the clinical detachment of a man who was absolutely going to hold this over Caspian's head for years. "You need to be so saturated in his scent that every wolf in the Citadel reads the pair of you as bonded before you've said a word." Callista looked at the heavy wolf fur cloak Caspian was already unfastening from his shoulders. He held it out to her. It was enormous. It smelled, she discovered as she took it, of pine forest and cold night air and something underneath, like iron and warm stone. Her wolf did something it had never done before. It leaned into the scent. Not assessing, not cataloging, leaning the way a guard dog presses against the door of the room it's protecting. As if this scent was a perimeter, and her wolf had just decided to patrol it. Her wolf assessed. "This is acceptable. Put it on. It covers our shoulders." "Good. Nothing can approach from behind now." It was the olfactory equivalent of being told to stand very close to someone you found slightly terrifying. Her wolf considered it a tactical upgrade. She put it on. It swallowed her. The hem puddled on the floor. Across the room, something in Caspian shifted. His jaw tightened. His eyes darkened by a fraction. His wolf supplied a single, emphatic assessment. "Correct. This is correct. She should always smell like this. Also, the cloak is inadequate. We have better ones. Why did we give her the worst cloak?" He told himself to focus. "We also need a story," Theron continued. "When the court asks, and they will ask, how this happened, you need to agree. When did you first meet? When did you know? What did she say? What did you feel?" We met in the archives, Caspian said. That's true. The truth is not the problem. The embellishment is. You, he pointed at Callista, are going to say it was a slow realization, that you'd known him for months and then one day something shifted. And you, he pointed at Caspian, are going to say you knew immediately, that you walked into the archives one night and the world rearranged itself. Why the different stories? Callista asked. Because a bond that sounds rehearsed is suspicious. Two people who tell the same love story in exactly the same way are performing. But two people who remember it differently, one who knew immediately and one who took longer, that sounds real. That sounds like every actual couple. Callista looked at Caspian. Caspian looked at Theron. You've thought about this, Caspian said. One of us has to. Chapter 2. The next 3 days were a tutorial in controlled humiliation. Callista moved into the Queen's chambers, which were the kind of opulent that felt like an argument. Velvet the color of spilled wine, silk the shade of a winter sky, a bed so vast it probably had its own weather system. She'd spent 3 years sleeping on a narrow cot above the kitchens. This bed could host a small diplomatic summit. The first thing her wolf did was a full perimeter check. Not Callista, her wolf. Before she'd even set down her bag, she found herself walking the edges of the room, checking the window latches, testing the bolt on the door, opening the wardrobe and, for no reason she could articulate to a rational person, sniffing the corners. She stood in the middle of the room and thought, I just sniffed a wardrobe. This is who I am now. The first night, she couldn't sleep. Not because of the size or the strangeness, but because the furs smelled like him. Pine and iron and warm stone, and she lay in the center of that enormous bed wrapped in his scent and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. It was absurd. She was in more danger than she'd ever been, but her wolf had made its assessment and was unmoved by logic. Her wolf assessed, perimeter secure, scent-marked territory. Nothing gets through the door, the furs, or us. Sleep. She told herself it was the quality of the mattress. Her wolf told her it was the quality of the scent, and that she should stop lying to them both. Theron coached her every morning. Posture, gaze, the particular way a bonded, wolf-blooded woman moved through a room. The touch rehearsals were the worst. They sat in her chambers with Theron directing like an exasperated theater producer, while Caspian practiced the small physical vocabulary of a bonded pair. Hand on the small of her back, fingers brushing hers when passing a goblet. The particular way he should lean in to speak to her, close enough to be intimate, far enough to suggest he was holding himself back from being more so. Closer, Theron said. Caspian's hand settled on her waist. His thumb rested against her hip bone through the fabric. It was a carefully calibrated gesture, possessive without being aggressive, familiar without being crude. It was also, Callista discovered, the kind of touch that made her entire left side go slightly warm in a way she was choosing to attribute to the fireplace. Her wolf was less diplomatic. His hand, on our territory. We need a moment. This is fine. His thumb is on our hip. We are experiencing something. Stand down. Do not stand down. We are confused. It was the first time in Callista's life that her wolf had ever been confused. Her wolf did not get confused. Her wolf sorted things into ours and not ours and threat and moved on. There was no category for his hand is on our hip and we want it to stay there and we don't know what shelf to put this on. Better. Now look at him. Not like that. You're examining him for signs of disease. Look at him like, Caspian, tell her a secret. What? Tell her something. Anything. Give her a reason to look at you like you're interesting. I once got sick on my first hunt, Caspian said after a pause, in front of the entire court. Callista blinked. Then, involuntarily, the corner of her mouth twitched. How old were you? 15, old enough to know better. What happened? The deer fought back. The twitch became a small, surprised smile. It was the first genuine expression she'd made in his presence that wasn't fear or scholarly neutrality. That, Theron said, pointing at her face, that exact expression, whatever that was, do that in the Great Hall and we might survive the week. The next morning, Callista heard the crack of wooden practice swords from the training yard and went to the window. She told herself she was curious about the facility. It was an architectural feature of the Eastern Wing. She was an archivist. She noticed architecture. Her wolf told her she was checking on something that was hers, and could she please stop pretending otherwise? It was embarrassing for both of them. We do not own the king, Callista told her wolf firmly. Her wolf said nothing. It simply kept watching. The silence was pointed. Caspian and Theron were sparring in the yard below, stripped to shirt sleeves despite the cold. She'd expected it to be a performance, the king demonstrating power for the guards who lined the walls. It wasn't. It was two men who had been doing this since they were boys, and it showed in the shorthand of their movement, the way they anticipated each other's patterns, the easy rhythm of attack and counter that came from years of muscle memory. Caspian was faster than Theron, stronger, obviously. The size difference made that inevitable. But Theron was smarter with his footwork, more efficient, and he fought like a man who'd spent his life learning to beat opponents who outweighed him. What happened next was entirely Callista's fault. She leaned forward on the windowsill. The morning light was hitting the yard at the angle that made everything gold-edged, and Caspian's shirt was damp with exertion and clinging to his back in a way that she was observing from a purely structural standpoint. Her wolf had no interest in pretending this was structural. Good, strong, can protect things, relevant. He turned mid-parry, and his gaze snagged on her window. On her. Just for a beat. A half-second of broken concentration. Theron's practice sword caught him across the ribs. Hard. Caspian went down. Not gracefully. He hit the packed dirt with a grunt and lay there, winded, staring at the sky with the expression of a man reconsidering several life choices. Her wolf reacted before she did. A spike of alarm, sharp and hot. He's down. Threat? Where's the threat? No, he's fine. Sparring. He's fine. But he's on the ground, and that is unacceptable. The ground is dirty, and he should not be on it. Callista gripped the windowsill and forced herself to breathe. He was fine. It was a practice sword. She did not need to... What, exactly? Run down 3 flights of stairs and stand over a fallen king like a dog guarding a bone? Her wolf thought this was an excellent plan, actually. Theron stood over him, not even breathing hard. He glanced up at Callista's window, then back down at his king. Fascinating, Theron said. You've been disarming me since we were 16, and today you forgot how to hold a sword. I wonder what changed. Shut up. Was it the architecture? I hear the Eastern Wing is very distracting this time of morning. I will have you posted to the border. You've threatened that 4 times this week. I'm beginning to think you don't mean it. Caspian took Theron's offered hand and hauled himself up, dirt on his jaw, his hair in his eyes, looking nothing like a king and everything like a man who'd been knocked flat by his best friend and was trying to decide whether to laugh or commit murder. He chose laughter, a short, reluctant huff that cracked open something in his face she hadn't seen before. Something young, something that existed before the crown and the council and the weight of all of it. Callista stepped back from the window. Her heart was doing something she couldn't file under stress response or proximity effect or any other clinical term she'd been using to keep herself organized. Her wolf couldn't file it either. But her wolf didn't need to file it. Her wolf had simply added Caspian to the inventory, somewhere between the Vassic Chronicles and the first edition Northern War histories. Top shelf, highest security, do not let anyone touch. The king who got knocked into the dirt and laughed about it was a different person than the king who held her hand at dinner. She'd been able to manage the second one. He was impressive and terrifying, and she could keep him at a careful distance inside her own head. The man in the dirt? She could not manage. The man in the dirt was someone she wanted to know. And wanting things, as she had learned at great cost, was the first step toward losing them. She went back to her research. She did not look out the window again. She looked out the window again. Her wolf was already looking. In the library that afternoon, he found her on a ladder, reaching for a high-shelf tome on Drabis territorial law. "You could ask a servant," he said. He was sitting at the reading table nearest her ladder, which was not where he'd started. He'd started at the table by the window, 6 feet away. Over the past hour he had moved. First the chair, then his papers, then the inkwell, then himself, so that he was now positioned directly between her and the door. He hadn't noticed himself doing this. She had. She had also noticed that he'd rearranged the 3 books she'd left on the table so they were aligned with the edge, spines facing outward, sorted by date. She hadn't asked him to do this. She suspected he hadn't realized he'd done it. Her wolf noticed it too, and had an opinion that arrived with the force of a gavel. He organized our books. He sorted them. By date. We need to sit down. No, we are on a ladder. We need to stay on the ladder and think about what just happened. He touched our things and improved them. This was, in her wolf's hierarchy of meaningful events, roughly equivalent to a marriage proposal. "You are going to be a problem," Callista told her wolf. Her wolf was too busy staring at the sorted books to respond. "Servants don't know which edition I need." She stretched. Her sleeve slid back, revealing the underside of her wrist. The thin skin, the faint blue map of veins, the pulse beating steadily beneath. He looked at that pulse and his entire brain went briefly, catastrophically offline. The wrist. We need to be closer to the wrist, for security purposes. The wrist is vulnerable and unprotected, and this is a threat assessment. We are assessing threats. He turned away and gripped the edge of a reading table until the wood creaked. "Something wrong?" she asked, climbing down. "You're researching Draga's territorial law." "Someone should. Your counsel isn't going to stop because you announced a bond. Ruja will want proof. I'm finding us ammunition." She set the book on the table, her expression shifting into the particular focus that came over her when she was working. Sharp, absorbed, alive in a way she wasn't when she was performing queenliness. "There's a secondary clause, not in the main treaty, in the territorial compact that preceded it. The Dragas alliance was conditional on mutual defense. They invoked it once, 60 years ago, and Volkov refused. Your great-grandfather refused." She looked up. "That refusal is technically a prior breach. If Volkov broke the compact first, the marriage clause built on top of it has no foundation." He stared at her. She'd been in the library for 2 hours, and she'd found something his entire council had missed for weeks. "You're certain?" "I've cross-referenced 3 sources. I need 1 more to be airtight. But yes." She pushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I'm certain." Her wolf sat back, satisfied. Threat identified. Threat neutralized. The collection is protected. And then, softer, in a register Callista almost didn't catch. "He is looking at us. He sees us now. Good. He should see us. We are not unassuming." Something caught her attention then, a scent, faint, coming from the corridor. Candle wax and old stone, and something underneath, sharper, like anger held too long. She glanced toward the door. There was no one there. Her wolf lifted its head. Someone was here, recently. Hostile intent. The scent is wrong. She shook it off. Almost. As she turned back to her research, something else registered, small, easily dismissed. She knew he was still watching her before she looked. Not from sound or movement, from something directional, a faint warmth at the back of her neck, like standing near a banked fire. She attributed it to the afternoon sun and moved on. They looked at each other. The performance fell away for a moment. No court watching, no choreography. Just 2 people in a library, one of whom had just saved the other's kingdom with a footnote. "Thank you," he said. He meant it for the research. He meant it for more than the research. "Don't thank me yet. We still have to survive the council. Chapter 3. The evening of the first public appearance, Callista stood in front of her mirror in the deep forest green of the Volkov banner and thought, "You are going to die in this dress." Her wolf thought, "We are going to kill anyone who tries." This was new. Not the protectiveness. Her wolf had always been protective. But the scope had changed. She used to guard documents, shelves, the quiet sanctity of the archive. Now her wolf was running a security assessment on an entire great hall and finding it tactically deficient. Callista stared at her reflection and thought, "My wolf is planning a military defense of a dinner party." Caspian arrived at her door, black from throat to boot, broken only by a silver wolf head clasp. He looked like a weapon someone had dressed up for dinner. He stopped in the doorway. His gaze moved over her, the green dress, the Volkov colors, the way she stood like a woman preparing for a siege rather than a meal. Something softened at the edge of his mouth. "You look the part," he said. "I'm not sure I can play it." For what it's worth, I once had to greet the Dragas envoy with a black eye because Theron hit me in the face during training the morning of the summit. I told them it was a hunting accident. Dragan told me I should hunt smaller animals. He paused. "I'm saying that confidence is mostly a matter of walking forward while terrified and hoping no one checks." It was such an unexpected thing, the king of Volkov offering her a story about his own humiliation as comfort, that she felt something in her chest unlock by a fraction. He stepped closer, pine and iron and warm stone. "You won't be playing it alone." He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, rehearsed. They'd practiced this exact gesture with Theron watching. But Theron wasn't watching now, and the touch landed differently without an audience, lighter, slower, like he'd forgotten the choreography and was just touching her. Her wolf went absolutely still. The kind of still it went when something precious was being handled. The held breath of a guarder watching someone reach for the most valuable thing on the shelf. "Careful," her wolf whispered. But it wasn't telling him to be careful, it was telling her. Her breath caught. Physiological response. Stress adjacent. Not relevant. Her wolf. Lie. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "I barely know you, Your Majesty." "You know I'm a king with no other options. Trust that." He offered his arm. She took it. The muscle under her fingers was absurd, dense and hard, the arm of a person who had spent his entire life preparing for violence and then attending formal dinners. She focused on breathing. In, out. One foot, the other foot. Her wolf focused on everything else. Every guard's position, every door, the temperature of the air, the direction of every scent. The great hall swallowed them whole. The hush was instantaneous and total. Hundreds of faces, hundreds of wolves in human skin, every one of them with senses sharp enough to smell the fear she was fighting to contain. She felt the shock ripple through the room like a physical wave. Who is that? Why is she on his arm? That's the archivist. The archivist? Her wolf did something unexpected. Instead of shrinking under the scrutiny, it expanded, hackles up, gaze steady, a low vibration in her chest that she felt more than heard. "This is our room now. We walked in on his arm. That makes it ours. Look away." None of them looked away, but none of them stepped forward either. Caspian's hand covered hers. His thumb began a slow stroke across the back of her hand. They'd practiced this too. It was supposed to read as intimate reassurance. What it actually did was send a current of warmth up her arm that made her jaw tighten. They walked to the high table. She could feel Elder Ruja's gaze, cold, sharp, calculating, from across the room. Her wolf clocked it, filed it. Threat. Primary. Seated, left flank. Will need to be watched. Sevda Dragas sat beside the old woman, beautiful and contemptuous, her lip curled in a sneer that could strip paint. Her wolf clocked that, too. Threat. Secondary. More dangerous than the elder. The elder calculates. This one enjoys it. Caspian pulled out the queen's chair, empty for a generation. She sat. "One of 14, her brain supplied cheerfully. "Your move, your majesty." Her wolf. "14 is the old count. We will not be added to it. We are not them. They did not have us." The meal was torture. The court watched every micro-gesture. Every time Caspian leaned in to murmur something, usually stage directions, "Eat, they're watching. Smile at me. Smaller. That one looks like a grimace." A dozen conversations paused. He placed his hand on the back of her chair, his fingers near the nape of her neck, close enough to feel, not quite touching. It made every nerve ending in that patch of skin stand at full attention. Her wolf considered the proximity of his hand to her neck one of the most vulnerable points on a wolf's body, and instead of alarm, felt something that could only be described as approval. "He guards our back. This is correct. He may stay." Halfway through the meal, Caspian left the table briefly to speak with a border captain near the door. Callista kept eating, kept smiling, kept performing. But the moment he moved away, something in her chest shifted. A subtle wrongness, like a compass needle losing north. She knew the exact moment he turned to come back before she heard his footsteps. The wrongness corrected itself. She told herself it was hypervigilance. She was in a room full of hostile wolves. Of course she was tracking the one person on her side. Her wolf said nothing. Her wolf was learning not to explain things Callista wasn't ready to hear. But Caspian was fighting a different war. From his side, the hall was a sensory assault. He could hear her heartbeat, fast, frightened, steady enough to pass. He could smell her beneath his own scent on the cloak, paper and lavender and something under it like clean earth after rain. Tonight it was louder, closer, demanding attention in a way that had nothing to do with their arrangement. He needed to escalate the performance. "Your hands are cold," he murmured. He took her hand from her lap and laced his fingers through hers, resting them on the table in full view of the court. Her skin was cool and bare. In the archives, she'd been wearing gloves, cotton, thin, but enough to muffle everything underneath. Now there was nothing between his skin and hers, and her scent, the real one, the one that had been filtered through cotton and buried under ink and old parchment, hit him like a door opening onto a landscape he'd been walking toward his entire life. Clean earth after rain, warm and alive under the layers of his own pine and iron that she'd been carrying for days. Something happened. It wasn't what the stories described. There was no thunderbolt, no supernatural roar. What happened was quieter and worse. A certainty settled into him like a key finding the lock it was made for. Every scattered, unresolved thing in his chest aligned. The noise went silent. The room went irrelevant. There was her hand in his, and the absolute, bone-deep knowledge that this was not a performance. "Oh," supplied the deepest part of him, with the unhurried satisfaction of an assessment finally confirmed. "Yes, obviously. We knew this. We knew this before the cloak. We knew this in the archives when she corrected us about the treaty. Everything before this was logistics." He tightened his grip, a spasm of shock he couldn't control. Callista felt the grip change. She glanced at him, brow furrowed, her intelligent eyes asking a question she didn't know the shape of. Her wolf noticed the grip change, the spike in his scent, something new underneath the pine, something raw and enormous. Her wolf cataloged it with the precision of an archivist handling a document she'd never seen before. Unknown, significant, related to us. File under, urgent, do not discard, revisit immediately. She felt nothing supernatural. To her, this was a warm hand holding her cold one. A good performance. But something else happened that she would only understand later. His thumb pressed against the inside of her wrist, and for a single beat, she felt his pulse through her own skin. Not heard it, felt it. Two rhythms, briefly synchronized, before hers scattered back to its own pattern. She blinked, looked down at their joined hands, looked up. He was already standing, pulling her up with him. The hall went silent. "The Queen is weary," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "We retire." He didn't wait for a response. He walked her out of the hall at a pace that was approximately 2 steps faster than dignified, through the doors, into the empty corridor, where he dropped her hand and leaned against the cold stone wall, like a man who'd been punched in the chest. Her wolf felt the separation like a door slamming. Why? Why did he let go? He was holding. This is wrong. The hand was correct. Put it back. "What happened?" Callista asked, pulling back. "You're shaking." "I'm fine," Caspian said. "You're not fine," Callista shot back. "You just dragged us out of dinner in front of the entire court. That wasn't in the choreography." "I improvised," he said. "You're a terrible liar for a king." Footsteps behind them. Theron materialized from the shadows with the specific expression of a man who was already composing the lecture. "Well," he said, looking at the pair of them, Caspian white-knuckled against the wall, Callista standing 2 feet away with her arms crossed. "That was dramatic. The entire court now believes you dragged your new mate off to ravish her, which I suppose is one way to sell the bond." "Theron," Caspian started. "Congratulations on the most unhinged dinner exit in Volkov history," Theron said. "I'll add it to the archives." "I need to speak with you," Caspian said. "Alone." Callista looked between them. She was an archivist. She read the spaces between what was written. Something had happened in that hall that she hadn't been able to see, and Caspian was holding it in his jaw like a wolf holding a bone. Her wolf didn't want to leave. Her wolf wanted to stand between Caspian and the wall and guard. The urge was so strong that she actually took a step forward before she caught herself. "He is not a manuscript," she told her wolf. "He is not a first edition. We do not guard kings." Her wolf's response was the emotional equivalent of a very slow, very deliberate blink. "We do now." "I'll be in my chambers," she said, "plotting my survival." She walked away, her green dress whispering against stone. That night, she woke at 3 a.m. with her hand pressed flat against the stone wall that separated their chambers. She had no memory of moving from the center of the bed. Her palm was warm against the cold stone, as if she'd been holding it there for a long time. She pulled her hand back, stared at it, went back to sleep. Her wolf had been awake the entire time, palm side down against the wall, and did not comment. Caspian waited until her door closed. Then he turned to Theron and said very quietly, "It's real." Theron went still. "What's real?" "The bond. The mate bond. She's—" He couldn't finish the sentence. He pressed both palms flat against the wall as if trying to push through it. "When I took her hand, in the hall, it arrived." Theron stared at him for a long time. 3 seconds, 5, 10. "So," he said eventually, "the woman you selected specifically because you felt nothing for her, the woman you chose because she was strategically unassuming and politically irrelevant, that woman is your actual fated mate?" "Yes," Caspian said. "The fake bond is a real bond," Theron repeated. "Yes. And she doesn't know." "She felt nothing," Caspian said. Another long silence. Theron leaned against the opposite wall, crossed his arms, and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man mentally drafting his resignation. "This is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. And you once fell off a horse in front of the Dragas envoy." "I'm aware." "Does she know what you are? What you're actually feeling?" "No, and she can't. If she finds out the bond is real, she'll bolt. She agreed to a performance, not a marriage." The word fell like a stone in water. "The arrangement stands," Caspian said, his voice tight with the effort of being the king instead of the man whose entire body was screaming at him to go back to that corridor and find her. "She doesn't find out. We proceed as planned. The bond, the real one, is my problem. Your problem, Theron repeated. Your problem is that you're a wolf who has found his mate and is about to spend every waking hour in her company pretending you haven't. That's your problem. I've handled worse. No, you haven't. Theron pushed off the wall. I'm in. I've always been in. But if this breaks you, I need you to tell me before it breaks the kingdom. Deal? Caspian met his eyes. Deal. Theron nodded once and walked away. Behind him, Caspian stood alone in the corridor, his hands clenched so hard his knuckles ached, and tried to remember how to be a king when every part of him wanted to be something much simpler and much more dangerous. The next morning, Sevda Dragas found Callista in the corridor outside the queen's chambers. Found was the wrong word. Cornered was more accurate. She materialized from the shadows like something that had been waiting there, tall, dark-haired, dressed in the blood red of House Dragas, with the kind of beauty that made you want to back slowly toward the nearest exit. Her eyes were black, not dark brown, black. The eyes of a predator that didn't bother pretending to be anything else. Callista's wolf was on its feet before Sevda opened her mouth. Not alarmed, ready. Ears forward, weight centered. Every sense trained on the incoming threat. So, Sevda said, leaning against the stone wall as if she owned it. The archivist. Callista's pulse spiked. She kept her face neutral. Lady Dragas? You're wearing his cloak. Sevda's nostrils flared, delicate, deliberate. She was scenting. His soap? His furs? A slow smile, the kind that had no warmth in it. You smell like a costume. Callista's stomach dropped. A bonded mate doesn't layer scent, Sevda continued, stepping closer. Her voice was low, conversational, the way someone might discuss the weather while sharpening a knife. A bonded mate is the scent. It lives in the blood, the marrow. You can't wash it off, and you can't put it on. She tilted her head. What you smell like is a woman who's been sleeping in the king's laundry. Sevda was right. The layering was superficial. Any wolf with a sharp enough nose could tell the difference between proximity scent and bond scent. But her wolf didn't care about the political calculus. Her wolf was doing something Callista had never experienced with this intensity. It was growling. Not audibly, she wasn't that far gone, but internally, a low, continuous vibration that said, back up, and you are too close, and she threatened what is ours, and we will not allow this. Is there something I can help you with, Lady Dragas? Callista said, her voice steady. Or did you come to discuss laundry? Sevda's black eyes narrowed. For a moment, something flickered behind them. Surprise, maybe. She hadn't expected the archivist to push back. I came to see what was so special. Sevda's gaze moved over her slowly, clinically, the way you'd inspect a horse you were considering declining. My father promised me a throne. This one. The Volkov elders promised it, and instead, the king chose a woman who irons documents for a living. I don't iron them, I preserve them. There's a difference. There is no difference. You are paper and dust, and this court will eat you alive. She leaned in close enough that Callista could smell her. Smoke and iron and something feral. Enjoy the bed, archivist. It won't be yours for long. She turned and walked away, every step a declaration of war. Callista stood in the corridor, her back against the cold stone, and let herself breathe. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear. Her wolf was raging. Not the cold, strategic assessment it usually ran. This was something older and hotter. Sevda had walked up to the thing Callista was guarding, this fragile, insane, temporary arrangement that somehow contained her grandfather's lands and her name and a king who sorted her books, and had tried to take it. Her wolf's response was simple and absolute. She does not get him. She does not get this room. She does not get the furs or the name or any of it. Ours. Callista pressed her palms flat against the stone wall. It's not ours, she told her wolf. It's an arrangement. Temporary. We give it back in 6 months. Her wolf said nothing. The silence was the loudest thing Callista had ever heard it say. She went back into her chambers. She closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands against the furs, his furs, and told herself the trembling in her hands was adrenaline. Her wolf pressed closer to the scent. Ours. Quiet now. We have it. We guard it. Nothing else matters. She did not think about why the furs helped. She did not think about why her wolf, which had spent 10 years guarding ink and paper without complaint, had just reclassified a living, breathing king as the most important thing on the shelf. Chapter 4. On the 3rd day, a courtier named Julien, young, ambitious, transparently fishing for gossip, approached them in the garden. "Your Majesty, my lady," he said, bowing. "The court is fascinated by the romance. When did you first realize—" He left the question hanging, a baited hook. Caspian opened his mouth. "The moment I walked into the archives, I saw her and—" "It was gradual for me," Callista said at the same time. They looked at each other. "She took longer to come around," Caspian said smoothly. "He's being generous. I thought he was there to complain about a citation." Julien's eyebrows rose. A citation? He'd been referenced in a chronicle of the Northern Campaign as Caspian the Younger. He took exception. This was a complete fabrication. Caspian had never once visited the archives to complain about a citation. But the lie was so specific, so mundane, so exactly the kind of thing a king would be petty about, that Julien laughed and believed every word. Later, when the courtier was gone, Caspian looked at her. Caspian the Younger? It was the first thing I thought of. I'm going to find that chronicle and burn it before someone checks. It doesn't exist. Then I'm going to burn whatever chronicle is closest to it, on principle. Her wolf's hackles went up so fast, Callista nearly choked. Burn? A chronicle? Absolutely not. We will die on this hill. No one burns anything in the archive. Not the king, not anyone. She laughed. Not the polished laugh she'd been practicing for court, a real one, startled out of her by the collision between Caspian's deadpan outrage and her wolf's genuine panic over a hypothetical book burning. It was small and warm, and it changed her whole face. The guarded, careful archivist disappeared for a half-second, replaced by someone quick and bright and unguarded. He watched it happen like a man watching the sun come out, and the part of him that cataloged everything filed this under important. Make this happen again. Investigate methods. Humor appears to be the mechanism. We are not funny. This is a tactical problem. He gave her a flower from the garden wall. A single flower. A weed, technically. We conquered the northern ridge at 17, and this is our offering. Inadequate. Perhaps a wing of the palace. She would use it for the archives. Practical and territorial. Better. He gave her the flower. She smelled it. Her wolf immediately cataloged the scent and filed it under his, outdoor, alive, keep. The council session was a war fought with chairs and silence. Caspian on the obsidian throne. Callista in the queen's seat beside him, her spine straight, her hands still, looking like a woman who had spent her life in rooms like this. She hadn't. She'd spent her life reading about rooms like this. But the translation, it turned out, was surprisingly direct. Her wolf had been running a threat assessment since they'd entered. Ruja, primary, heart rate elevated. Sevda, secondary, scent too controlled, masking something. 3 elders on the right, neutral, leaning hostile. 2 guards by the door, loyal. 1 by the window, unclear. The resolution of these readings had sharpened, the range had expanded. It was as if her wolf had been running at half capacity for a decade, and something had recently, she didn't want to think about what, upgraded the system. Ruja rose. Your Majesty, The Dragas alliance is vital. Alpha Dragon's patience is not infinite. We must formalize the union. She still did not look at Callista. The omission was its own insult. The alliance is off the table, Elder. The treaty, Ruja began. Caspian cut her off. Is void. But since you've raised it, he didn't look at Callista. He didn't need to signal her. She already knew. Callista stood. The room went very still. Council members did not stand unbidden. Queens who had not yet been formally bonded certainly did not stand unbidden. The breach of protocol was so startling that even Ruja's composure cracked for a half-second. Elder Ruja, Callista said, her voice carrying with a clarity that surprised even her. The treaty you reference was built on the Dragas Territorial Compact of the Third Southern War, a mutual defense agreement. Under that compact, Volkov was called upon to defend the Dragas Southern Pass 62 years ago during the Sereni incursion. She paused. The room was not breathing. Volkov refused. King Aldrich, His Majesty's great-grandfather, denied the call. The refusal is documented in the council minutes of the 43rd year, the Sereni war correspondence, and the Dragas formal protest filed with the Interpack Tribunal. She let that sink in. A prior breach of the foundational compact invalidates all subsequent agreements built upon it, including the marriage clause. Silence. Deep, ringing silence. Ruja's face was a study in controlled fury. The archivist plays at law. The archivist reads law, Elder. There's a difference. Her wolf was fully online, every sense razor-sharp, reading the room the way she read a contested document. Ruja's hands were gripping the table. Her scent had shifted. The controlled elder was cracking, and underneath was something acrid and desperate. She doesn't have the evidence. She knows it. She'll try intimidation next because the facts have failed her. Callista could hear Ruja's heartbeat. Fast, uneven. That's called fear, her wolf supplied with a bright, fierce satisfaction. We did that. Our knowledge. Our preparation. She came for what is ours, and she will leave with nothing. Callista wanted to bare her teeth. She actually wanted to. The urge was so strong she had to consciously unclench her jaw. Her wolf thought this was a missed opportunity. If the council wishes to verify the sources, they're in the archives, Section 12, Shelf 9. I've marked the relevant passages. She sat down. Caspian had not moved. His expression was the mask of a king, impassive, regal, giving nothing away. But beneath the table, where no one could see, his hand was gripping the arm of his throne hard enough to dent the wood. His instincts were silent, completely, utterly silent. The wolf, the king, the man, every fractured part of him that usually ran competing assessments had gone still, unified, watching her. I am going to love her for the rest of my life, he thought, and it is going to be the ruin of everything, and I don't care. She may keep the den, his instincts offered at last, quietly. She is competent. This is acceptable. This council is adjourned, Caspian said. He stood, extended his hand to Callista. She took it. They walked out. Behind them, Theron, standing at his post by the door, did not smile. But his eyes, for anyone paying attention, were the eyes of a man who had just been proven right about a bet he'd only barely made with himself. That night, Caspian stood outside her door for a full minute before knocking. He told himself he was checking on her. She'd just stood up to the most powerful elder in the kingdom. She'd need reassurance, debriefing. This was strategic. She opened the door in a wool robe, her hair loose. Without the armor of the gown, she looked like the person she was before all this. Softer, plainer, more real. Her wolf knew he was there before the knock. It had been tracking his footsteps since the corridor, the particular weight of his stride, the way it slowed, the full minute of silence outside the door. It's midnight, she said. I know. You're in your nightclothes. He looked down. He was, in fact, in his nightclothes. He had not thought about this. The king of Volkov, she said, leaning against the doorframe, who commands armies and terrifies entire courts, has shown up at his fake queen's door at midnight in his bedclothes because he couldn't sleep. This is the man whose performance I'm supposed to find convincing. Are you going to let me in, or are you going to catalog my failures in the hallway where the guards can hear? Both, ideally. She stepped aside. A book lay open on her bed. Her room smelled like her, and the scent hit him like walking into a warm house after years in the cold. He sat in the chair by the fire. He moved two of her books to the edge of the table closest to him without realizing it. She noticed. She was keeping a mental tally of how many times he rearranged her things. The count was 14 across 6 days. She was beginning to think it was involuntary. Her wolf was keeping a different tally. He moves our things closer to him. He is collecting us. He does not know he is doing it. This is important. We don't know why. It is important. She'll retaliate, Callista said, sitting on the edge of her bed, tucking her legs under her. Ruja, I humiliated her in front of the council. She won't forget that. She won't. How worried should I be? You should be aware, not afraid. There's a difference. When this is over, she said, and her voice caught. A hairline fracture in the careful composure. When it's done and I go to my estates and you're free, will anyone remember that I did this? Not the performance, the real work, the treaty research, the council. The question landed in the center of his chest. I'll remember, he said. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. He looked at her. You're asking whether you'll matter after. She flinched, barely. A micro movement that someone without wolf-sharpened eyes would have missed entirely. Her wolf flinched too, because after meant leaving, and her wolf, which had spent 6 days expanding its perimeter from a single archive room to an entire wing of the citadel, from dusty manuscripts to a living king, was confronting for the first time the fact that the arrangement had an end date. We will have to give it back, her wolf realized. The furs, the room, the sorted books, him. The grief hit so hard and so fast that Callista stopped breathing. He could have told her the truth. He could have told her that she already mattered to him in a way that had nothing to do with the arrangement and everything to do with a bond she couldn't feel. He could have told her that the thought of her leaving, walking away to restored estates, wealthy and respected and gone, made something in him go very cold and very still. He didn't. Instead, he stood, crossed the distance, and tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. Not rehearsed, not for an audience. His fingers grazed the shell of her ear, and the warmth of her skin against his calloused fingertips was so quietly devastating that he had to hold his breath. She didn't pull away. Her eyes searched his face with the particular focus she usually reserved for contested documents, looking for what was between the lines, what the author didn't intend to reveal. Her wolf went perfectly, absolutely still. The stillness of a garter in the presence of the thing it has decided to protect above all else. No assessment, no catalog, just him, close, warm, and the terrifying knowledge that if someone tried to take this away from her right now, she would not step aside. She would not step aside. You're doing it again, she whispered. Doing what? Being something other than what you're telling me you are. He leaned in, his gaze dropped to her mouth. The distance between them collapsed to inches. He could feel her breath warm against his jaw. He was going to kiss her, and it was going to ruin everything. And he didn't care, because the alternative was not kissing her, and that was somehow worse. The pounding at the outer door cracked the moment in half. Theron's voice, stripped of all warmth and humor. Caspian, now! He jerked back. The king reassembled itself over the man in the space of a heartbeat. He crossed the room and opened the door. Theron, white-faced, eyes sharp with alarm. The western watchtower, there was a fire, a diversion. Pyotr, one of Ruja's personal guards, was intercepted scaling the exterior wall toward the queen's chambers. He was carrying a blade treated with nightshade oil. The words took a moment to land. The queen's chambers, these chambers. They had sent someone to kill her here, climbing the outer wall to bypass the interior guards, using the watchtower fire to draw the sentries away. If Theron's people hadn't been watching the exterior approach, if they had relied only on the guards inside, Callista came to stand in the doorway behind him, her face pale but composed. Her wolf processed the information in a single, white-hot flash. Someone tried to destroy what is ours. Not our books, not our archive, our life. They came for us. And then, with a clarity that cut through every careful boundary Callista had ever built, her wolf thought, they also came for him. Because if we die, his defense crumbles. The treaty comes back. They take him. They take him. Something in Callista, something ancient and patient and absolutely immovable, clicked into place like a bolt sliding home. Something in him shifted. Not his wolf. He was done thinking of it as something separate. This was him. All of him. Every civilized layer, every political calculation, every carefully maintained restraint, all of it burned away in a single clarifying blaze of rage. His eyes went gold. "Bar this door," he said to Theron. His voice was low, distorted, a register that belonged to something older and less forgiving than a king. "No one in or out until I return." Caspian, Callista. He turned to her. In the gold of his eyes, she saw something that made her breath stop. Not fury, but a devotion so absolute it looked like madness. "Stay, please." Her wolf screamed at her to follow him, to guard him, to put herself between him and whatever was out there in the dark. The urge was so violent, so total, that her hands shook with the effort of staying still. He was gone before she could answer. Theron stared after him, then looked at Callista. "Get away from the door," he said, his voice gentle in a way she hadn't heard from him before. "He'll come back." "What's he going to do?" Theron didn't answer. He didn't have to. Callista stepped back into her chambers. The door closed. She stood in the center of the room, her arms wrapped around herself, and listened to the citadel. She heard things she shouldn't have been able to hear. As if her wolf, denied the ability to physically follow him, had extended every sense like a net, casting outward, searching. Footsteps, rapid, in the lower corridor. A door breaking, not opening, breaking. The crack of wood splintering under force. A voice, raised, then cut short. Silence. A long stretch of it, thick and suffocating. She sat on the edge of the bed. She pressed her hands flat against the furs and felt the ghost of his warmth still living in the fabric. Her wolf pressed into it, desperate, straining, guarding the only piece of him still in the room. She wasn't afraid. That was the part that didn't make sense. Someone had tried to kill her, and she wasn't afraid. She was angry, not for herself, for him, for the fact that they'd forced his hand, backed him into the version of himself he kept locked away. She was furious that he was out there in the dark, becoming something that would cost him, and she couldn't stop it. Her wolf was beyond anger. Her wolf had reached a place past emotion entirely, a cold, crystalline state of absolute certainty. When he comes back, we do not let go. We do not give this back. The arrangement is a lie. Not the bond, the ending. There is no ending. We will guard this until we are dust. This is not a decision. This is what we are. Another sound, farther away now. A scream that started high and ended in a wet, terrible nothing. Then deeper silence, the kind that fills a building after violence has emptied it. She pressed her hand to her chest. The warmth was there, not the ambient warmth of a fire or a fur, something directional. A pull, faint but insistent, like a compass needle swinging north. It pointed toward the corridor, toward wherever he was. She could feel him, not metaphorically, not as imagination or wishful projection. She could feel the shape of his rage, white hot, then cooling, then turning into something worse, the hollow aftermath of violence done by hands that hadn't wanted to do it. Her wolf knew what this was. It had been arriving for days. Every time she'd known which corridor he was in, every time she'd woken with her hand pressed to the wall between their rooms. Her wolf had been receiving the bond quietly, patiently, the way water seeps through stone. And tonight, the dam broke. Come back, she thought, and didn't know where the thought ended and the pull began. She waited. The fire popped, the candles guttered. She counted her own heartbeats and discovered, somewhere around the 300th, that she could feel a second heartbeat layered underneath hers. Distant, fast, gradually slowing. She did not tell herself it was her imagination. She was done lying. Her wolf was done lying too. They were done. Chapter 6. An hour later, or a lifetime, she heard the footsteps. Not the efficient stride of a king, something slower, heavier. The gait of a man carrying weight that wasn't physical. The door opened. Caspian stood in the frame, and Callista's first clinical thought was, that is a lot of blood. Her wolf's first thought was, is any of it his? It covered him, his face, his hands, the front of his black tunic, saturated and dripping. His eyes were still gold, but the killing blaze had burned down to embers, and what was left was something rawer, shock maybe, or horror. The face of a man looking at his own hands and not recognizing them. Her wolf scanned him, fast, thorough. Blood, mostly not his. Hands, shaking, intact. Eyes, gold, fading. Assessment, damaged but whole. He came back. He came back. He met her eyes. The world contracted. Scholar and killer. Fake queen and the king who had just ended lives for hers. He stepped into the room, swayed, caught himself on the doorframe. Callista, he said, and her name came out broken. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She walked toward him barefoot on the cold stone and stopped close enough to smell the iron on his skin. She reached up and wiped a smear of blood from his cheek with her thumb, gently, as if cleaning the margin of a damaged manuscript. It was the most real touch that had ever passed between them, unhurried, unself-conscious, with no audience and no choreography. Just her hand on his face and the truth of what he was. He broke. His knees hit the stone floor. His head bowed until his forehead nearly touched her hands, a surrender so complete it was its own kind of violence. The king, the wolf, the man, all of it, brought to its knees by the ferocity of what he felt. They tried to kill you, he whispered. My mate. He said the word, not the performance word, the careful lie they'd been selling to the court. The real word, the one from the legends. It fell into the blood-soaked air between them and stayed there, heavy and undeniable. The warmth in Callista's chest flared, sudden, fierce, so vivid it stole her breath. And her wolf that had guarded and catalogued and defended for 10 quiet years, rose up and answered. Not with words, with something older than words. A recognition that started in the marrow and worked outward, flooding every nerve, every sense. Every manuscript she'd protected, every shelf she'd defended, all of it had been preparation for this. Her wolf had always been a guarder. Now it knew what it had been built to guard. Ours, it said, and the word was so vast and so final that it rewrote every other word she'd ever known. Ours. Not temporary, not an arrangement. Ours. We guard this with everything we are and everything we will ever be, and if anyone tries to take him, we will show them what 10 years of guarding taught us, and they will not enjoy the lesson. She didn't say mate. She didn't say anything. She put her hand on his bowed head, on the blood-matted hair of a king kneeling at her feet, and let it rest there. Her wolf settled over them both like a blanket, like a shield, like the thing it had always been, a guard, standing post, finally at the door it was always meant to protect. She stayed. In the quiet of the Queen's chambers, surrounded by velvet and blood and the wreckage of every careful plan, that was enough. Dawn came gray and thin through the arrow-slit windows. Callista hadn't slept. Caspian had eventually risen from the floor, washed the blood from his hands in her basin, and sat in the chair by her fire. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing in the scripts of court behavior or the archives of history that covered what to say after a night like this. Her wolf kept watch. It didn't need sleep. It had waited 10 years for something worth staying awake for. He'd left before the servants came, moving through the pre-dawn corridors like a ghost. The first person Callista passed on her way to the archives was a household guard named Edric, an older wolf, steady, one of the few she'd exchanged pleasant words with during her years as archivist. He stepped aside to let her pass, then stopped. His nostrils flared. His eyes widened by a fraction, and he lowered his gaze, not the polite nod he usually gave her, but the full, deferential drop of a wolf, acknowledging someone who outranked him. He had never done that before. Callista kept walking, but her wolf catalogued it. He smelled something different. We smell different. Something changed last night, and it went into the skin. She noticed it twice more before she reached the archives. A servant who pressed herself flat against the wall. A young courtier who had always looked through her as if she were part of the stonework, suddenly unable to meet her eyes. She didn't fully understand it, but her wolf did. The layering was gone. The costume, as Sevda had called it, had burned away in the night, replaced by something that lived in the blood and the marrow, exactly where Sevda had said a real bond lived. Her wolf was quietly, fiercely satisfied. Theron found her an hour later, standing in the archives. She'd gone there by instinct, back to the dust, back to the one place that had always made sense. Except it didn't feel the same. The shelves were the same, the parchment was the same, the smell of old leather and dried ink was the same. But Callista was different. Her wolf was different. The archive felt small now. Not in a diminishing way, but in the way a childhood bedroom feels small when you come back to it. Still loved, just no longer the whole world. He stood in the doorway, watching her. He looked tired. The kind of tired that went deeper than one sleepless night. 3 dead, he said. Ruja, Voss, Marit, Pyotr is in the cells. How is he? Theron's expression tightened. The Citadel is in shock. Half the court is terrified of him. The other half is pretending they always knew Ruja was a traitor. He paused. Ruja served his father. He grew up calling her aunt. The weight of that settled into the room like smoke. He'll carry this, Callista said. Not a question. Forever. That's what it costs to be king. He paused. The Dragas clan will have heard by morning. They'll use this. I know. The council will need to be rebuilt, carefully. The wolves who are afraid of him now need to be shown something other than teeth. I know that, too. He was quiet for a moment. Then, he called you his mate. She turned. Were you listening? I didn't have to. The whole Citadel heard him. Not the word, the sound he made. The guards on the east wall reported that the king made a sound just before he stopped. It wasn't a performance, Callista. She knew. She'd known since the blood on his face, or maybe since the library when he'd looked at her like she'd rearranged the furniture of his mind. Or maybe since the archives, that first night, when he'd taken her hand and his skin had been unreasonably, insistently warm. Or maybe she'd known since her wolf had stopped guarding parchment and started guarding a king. It was never a performance, she said. Was it? Theron's gray eyes held hers. In them she saw the answer she already had, and the question she wasn't ready for. What was she going to do about it? Her wolf knew the answer. Her wolf had known since the furs. He's in the war room, Theron said. The Draga's response will come within the week. He'll need the council rebuilt, the alliances remapped, and the treaty defense you found made public and airtight. He paused. He'll need you. For the performance? For the kingdom. He turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, and I don't say things like this, so mark the date. I've known him since we were 14. He's never been less in control, and he's never been more himself. He shrugged, one shoulder, the Theron equivalent of a grand declaration. Make of that what you will. He left. She didn't make it to the war room. Sevda Dragas was waiting in the corridor, the same lean against the wall, the same blood-red dress, the same predator's posture. But this time, when Callista rounded the corner, Sevda's nostrils flared, and she went still. Not the calculated stillness of a woman preparing an insult, something raw, something involuntary. Her black eyes widened by a fraction, and for the first time since Callista had met her, Sevda Dragas looked uncertain. She was scenting, and what she found was not a costume. Callista didn't stop. She walked past Sevda the way she'd walked past an improperly shelved volume, noting the disorder, choosing not to address it, moving toward something more important. Archivist? Sevda said. Her voice had lost its lazy contempt. What remained was flatter, warier. Callista paused, turned, looked at Sevda with the calm, assessing gaze of a woman who had spent the night with a king's blood on her hands and discovered that she was not, in fact, made of paper and dust. Lady Dragas, she said, you mentioned last time that a bonded mate is the scent, that it lives in the blood. She held Sevda's gaze. Was there something else you wanted to discuss? Or has the laundry satisfied your curiosity? Sevda said nothing. Her jaw tightened. Her hands, at her sides, curled into fists. Callista turned and walked away. She did not look back. Her wolf looked back. Her wolf always looked back. Her wolf looked back and memorized the exact expression on Sevda's face, the moment a predator realized it had been outranked, and filed it under satisfying, reference as needed. Callista stood alone in the archives one last time, surrounded by the dust of centuries, and pressed her hand to her chest where the warmth still lived. She could hear, 2 floors above and behind a stone wall, the steady rhythm of a heartbeat that she had no business being able to hear. She knew whose it was. She'd always known. The dust had stopped being enough. The question was whether she was brave enough to want something that could be taken away, something messy and blood-stained and terrifyingly alive. She thought of her grandfather's lands. She thought of every queen who had walked into a court and not walked out. Then she thought of a king on his knees, saying mate like it was the only true thing he'd ever said. Her wolf settled in her chest like a fire banking for the night, warm, steady, certain. We guard this. We have always been guarding this. Every book, every shelf, every locked door. It was all practice. We are ready now. She picked up a fresh piece of parchment, dipped her quill, and began to write a different kind of history. Epilogue. It happened in stages. The first was scent. Not the costume, not the borrowed cloak and the furs and the soap that Sevda had seen through like glass. This was something else. It started the morning after the assassination, when Callista walked into the war room and Caspian looked up from the map table. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The moment she crossed the threshold, something in the air between them shifted, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the grate. By the end of the first week, Theron stopped wrinkling his nose. You don't smell like his laundry anymore, he said, in the same tone a man might use to comment on the weather. You smell like each other. It's nauseating. Congratulations. Callista's wolf preened. Her wolf had been waiting for this confirmation with the patience of an archivist verifying a primary source. Documented, corroborated, filed under permanent. The scent deepened over days. It wasn't something either of them did on purpose. It lived in proximity, in the hours spent side by side rebuilding the council, in the arguments over treaty language that lasted until the candles guttered, in the moments when his hand found the small of her back as they walked the corridors, and neither of them mentioned it. The court noticed. Wolves always notice. The guards who had once nodded politely at the archivist now dropped their eyes when she passed. Not from fear, from recognition. She carried the king's scent in her blood, and her own scent had woven into his so thoroughly that the old wolves, the ones who remembered real bonds from before the political marriages hollowed the tradition out, began to whisper a word that hadn't been used sincerely in the citadel for a generation. True bonded. Her wolf heard every whisper and catalogued them all. Correct. They are correct. We could have told them weeks ago, but wolves are slow learners. The second stage was territory. It started small, his hand on her chair during council meetings, not on the back of it, but on the arm, where her sleeve ended and her wrist began. His thumb tracing the vein there, absently, while he argued border policy with men twice his age. Callista lost the thread of 3 separate negotiations because of that thumb. Then the sleeping wall. She stopped pretending she hadn't been pressing her palm against it every night. He stopped pretending he hadn't been doing the same thing from the other side. One night she heard his breathing through the stone, slow, deliberate, as if he was matching it to hers. The next morning, the door between their chambers was unlocked. Neither of them discussed who had unlocked it.
Her wolf walked through it first, obviously. Her wolf had been scratching at that door for weeks. He was sitting by the fire, reading a border report, and when she appeared in the doorway in her nightclothes, he looked up with an expression that was trying very hard to be kingly and failing comprehensively. "The door was open," she said. "It was. Did you unlock it?" "I don't recall." "You're a terrible liar for a king." "So I've been told." She sat in the other chair. He went back to the report. Her wolf curled up, metaphorically, somewhere deep in her chest, and for the first time since the fake bond had begun, felt something it had never felt before. Home. That became the pattern, the reports by the fire, the silence that didn't need filling, the slow gravitational drift from 2 chairs to 1, from sitting beside him to leaning against him, from his arm across the chair back to his arm across her shoulders, from pretending this was strategy to admitting it was need. The third stage was the mark. It happened in the archives of all places. She was reaching for a shelf, a high one, the old Dragas territorial records she needed for the council brief, and he was behind her before she registered his footsteps. His hand closed over hers on the shelf's edge, his chest against her back, his breath at the curve where her neck met her shoulder. "Caspian," she said. A warning or an invitation. She wasn't sure which. "I know," he said. His voice was wrecked. Her wolf went absolutely still, not in fear, in recognition. This is the place. This is the moment. He is asking. "Ask me," she said. She didn't turn around. His lips brushed the skin below her ear. Not a kiss, a question written on skin. "Yes," she said. The bite was careful, precise. Not the savage thing the old stories described, a wolf claiming territory with blood and force. This was deliberate, his teeth against her pulse point, pressing just hard enough to leave a mark that would darken over the next hour and never fully fade. A scar that said, "This one is guarded." Her wolf howled, silent, internal, enormous, a sound that filled every corridor of her chest and rattled the shelves of every archive she'd ever built inside herself. "Finally, we have been waiting. This is ours, and he is ours, and we are done pretending." The mark changed everything and nothing. In the war room, she still argued treaty language, and he still overruled her on border deployments. and she still overruled him right back. Theron still looked at both of them like a man reconsidering his career choices. The council still feared her, which was useful, and respected her, which was better. But in the corridors, when no one was watching, his fingers would find the mark at her throat. A light touch, barely there, reverent, and her wolf would press against it from the inside, like a cat leaning into a hand. And in the archives, late at night, surrounded by the dust that had once been her entire world, Callista would press her own fingers to the scar and feel his heartbeat through it, steady, warm, absurdly alive. Hers, his, theirs. Her wolf settled into the certainty of it like a book finding the exact right place on the shelf. Snug, aligned, permanent. "We guard this," her wolf said, one final time. And they did.